In one of my weekly live streams that I did recently, which I'm doing every Monday night at 5 o'clock Pacific time, I talked about the product rule and how you can easily apply the product rule formula to basically any example of finding the derivative of a function that is made up of a product of two smaller functions. And I thought you might find this example useful because it really breaks down, first of all, what the product rule formula is, but also how you can remember it and apply it yourself to any other example of using the product rule. So I wanted to show you that example again all by itself. This is one of the topics, one of the formulas covered on my Calculus 1 study guide and also covered in more detail in my complete Calculus 1 package. If you want to check those both out, the links to both of those things are down in the description below and the pinned comment. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the example and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Find the derivative of y equals, in parentheses, r squared minus 2r, close parenthesis, times e to the r. So you can see pretty clearly here, looking at this example, we do have a product, right? We have kind of these two different chunks of this function that we're going to be taking the derivative of that are being multiplied together. So that is obviously the first condition that we need in order to apply the product rule. So to apply the product rule, really that's going to be applicable whenever you have some function that can be thought of as the product of two smaller, simpler chunks of that function, which we do have here. So one thing to kind of note here, obviously within the parentheses here, we have one thing minus another thing. But since this whole, this whole thing right here is all in parentheses being multiplied by something else, we want to think of this whole parentheses as one of the parts of the product. So as a result, we can use the product rule to find the derivative of this function. There are other ways we could find the derivative, but I really want to go over product rule here. So this is going to be kind of the method we're going to apply. We can just leave it in this form in order to apply the product rule. So first of all, the product rule says that if we're trying to find the derivative of two functions being multiplied together, so let's say we want to find the derivative of f times g, that derivative would just be, and this is, just the formula. I'm going to show you, like I said, kind of the method that you can go through so that you don't really have to memorize the formula necessarily. But just so you have it, it's going to be the first term times the derivative of the second plus the derivative of the first times the second left alone. So f times g prime plus f prime times g. You could see this in other forms. We could switch this piece with this piece so that we have f prime times g plus f times g prime. It doesn't matter. That's the same thing, right? 1 plus 2 is the same as 2 plus 1. You could switch them. So, there are a lot of different orders we could write this, but the important thing is that the non-derivative of one function is being multiplied by the derivative of the other one, f times g prime. And then same thing over here, the derivative times the non-derivative. So like I said, kind of the way that you want to think about these product rule problems, if we can ignore the formula for a second and let's just think about what process we want to go through. So I've already kind of pointed out that we're going to say we have the product of these two things here, r squared minus 2r being one of those things and e to the r being the other thing. Okay, so if we're going to take the derivative of this function, we want to break it down into the two pieces that you are taking the product of to get your original function. So in this case, r squared minus 2r being one of those, e to the r being the other. So basically what we want to do then is call one of those f and one of those g. It doesn't really matter which is which, right? We could call this f and this g, or we could call this f and this g. That's what's kind of nice about the product rule, is it's going to end up working out right either way. So let's go ahead and just say that r squared minus 2r is f, e to the r is g. Okay, so that's step one, is designating which thing you're going to call f, which thing you're going to call g. Once you do that, the next step is to take the derivative of each of those things. So first of all, the derivative of r squared minus 2r, we could find just using the power rule. So we're just going to move the 2 down in front, keep the base of r the same, and then lower the power by 1. Lowering 2 minus 1 is just 1. So the derivative of r squared is 2r. And then the derivative of a constant times your variable is just going to be whatever that constant is. So 2. Then we need to find the derivative of e to the r. Well, in this case, r is our variable. So I guess I shouldn't have said d dx. Let's think of this as d dr, because that's really what we're finding here. We're treating r as our variable instead of x. So the derivative of e to whatever your variable is, the derivative of e to the r in this case, is just e to the r, right? E to your variable, specifically this base e, which is like roughly 2.71, is a very unique function because it is its own derivative. So as a result, g and g prime are both going to be e to the r. Okay. So now once you have found these four things, or decided your f and your g, and then found your f prime and your g prime, applying product rule is super easy. Okay. All you have to do, once you have f, g, f prime, g prime, multiply across. So you're going to do like a crisscross multiplication here, and then add up those two products. So basically this thing times this thing. So r squared minus 2r times e to the r times this thing here, and then add this thing times this thing. So 2r minus 2 times e to the r. Whoops, not times r, sorry, times e to the r. Okay, so you just multiply them across to get these two different products here, and then add them together. And then from here, we could simplify this a bit. So one thing that's kind of interesting here, both this term and this term have an e to the r in common. So what we could actually do is factor out e to the r and be left with each of these other two things. And then we can, in this case, the parentheses aren't really doing anything. We can drop the parentheses and combine our like terms. Basically, that's going to cancel with that, and we're just going to get r squared minus 2 times e to the r. So this is going to be y prime. Well, I hope you found that video helpful. If you did, don't forget to check out my free Calculus 1 study guide. It's available for instant download and it's completely free. There's a link down in the description and the pinned comment below where you can get that right now. If you want to keep testing out some of the other formulas on that cheat sheet, just go ahead and click on one of those videos over there. And I'll see you next time. Thanks.